Okay, picture this for a moment. Late Cretaceous Mongolia, and there's this tiny dinosaur. I mean, really small, maybe pigeon size.
Yeah.
But it has these features that get paleontologists thinking.
Yeah.
Birds. It kicked off quite a stir.
It really did.
So today on the deep dive, we're getting into Archaeornithoides Dinosauriscus. Our mission really is to unpack what the science tells us. What was this thing? Where did it fit in? And what's its connection, if any, to bird evolution?
And what's cool about this one, I think, is how the story changed. It wasn't just fact A, fact B. It was, initial ideas, excitement, and then new evidence comes along, and, well, things get revised. We can actually trace that scientific process.
Exactly. So let's start at the beginning, the discovery. It goes back quite a way, doesn't it?
It does. 1965, Bainzak in Mongolia. It was a Polish-Mongolian paleontological expedition that found the specimen.
But it wasn't named immediately.
No, the first mention, sort of a preliminary report, was by Anders Elzanowski in 1983. Then the official naming, Archaeornithoides Dinosauriscus, came in 92. That was Elzanowski again, this time with Peter Wellnhofer.
And the name itself, it tells the story, right?
It really does. Archaeornithoides, that basically means shaped like an ancient bird.
Okay.
And Dinosauriscus just means little dinosaur. So right there in the name, you see what struck them. Small size, bird-like traits.
Very direct.
Yeah. They announced it formally in Nature in 92, and then a much more detailed description came out in the American Journal of Science the following year, 93.
So let's dig into the actual fossil. What did they find? What are we basing all this on?
It's based on a single specimen, the holotype ZPAL MGD-II-29.
Right.
Found in river sandstones from the late Cretaceous, specifically the Jadokta Formation. That puts it in the late Companion Age, maybe around 75 million years ago.
And the specimen itself, what condition was it in?
It's fragmentary. It's part of the skull and the lower jaw is articulated, which is good, but incomplete. So you've got the paired maxillae, the main upper jaw bones, part of a cheekbone, the jugal, some bones from the palate, the roof of the mouth, and the dentaries, the lower jaw bones.
And crucially, what age was this individual?
They determined it was a juvenile, a young animal.
Ah, okay. That's always a key detail, knowing it's not fully grown. So how small are we talking? You said little dinosaur.
Yeah, tiny. The bit of head they found is only 27 millimeters long.
Wow.
Based on that, they estimated the whole skull might have been around 5 centimeters, maybe 2 inches.
And the whole animal?
Estimated body length, maybe 50 to 60 centimeters. So yeah, definitely one of the smallest non-bird dinosaurs we know from that time.
But again, it's a juvenile. The adults could have been bigger.
Exactly. We don't really know the adult size for sure. That's an unknown.
Okay. And what about details like teeth? Anything stand out there?
Well, the maxilla, the upper jaw fragment, has at least 8 teeth preserved. They're small, conical, like little pegs, and smooth. Yeah, no wrinkles, no serrations, none of those sharp edges or carinae you often see on meat-eating dinosaur teeth.
Interesting. Any other skull features mentioned?
There was a suggestion about the palatine bone, one of the palate bones. They thought maybe there was a secondary fenestra, like an extra opening in the roof of the mouth.
Okay, so small size, smooth teeth, maybe this palate opening. Now let's get to the bird connection. This was the big thing initially, right? What specific features screamed bird-like to Elzanowski and Wellnhofer?
Right, that was the core of their 1993 paper. They actually proposed that Archaeornithoides was the closest known relative to avulae, essentially, birds and their immediate ancestors.
That's a huge claim.
It was, and they based it on a list of features. Things like the way the premaxilla and maxilla bones connected at the front of the snout. It was an interdigitated suture, sort of like interlocking fingers.
Okay.
Also, broad bony shelves on the palate, signs of pneumatic sinuses, those air sacs invading the bone, which you see a lot in birds. Plus, a lack of interdental plates, which are bony plates between the teeth found in many dinosaurs, and those unserrated teeth we just mentioned.
That does sound like a compelling list, especially back then.
Absolutely. It generated a lot of excitement.
Science moves on.
Right.
You mentioned our understanding changed. What happened?
Well, it's a classic case of more fossils, more data. Since 93, we've found many more fossils of troodontids and dromaeosaurs, the raptors and their close relatives.
Right, other theropods thought to be close to birds.
Exactly. And crucially, fossils of both adults and juveniles of these groups started showing up. And guess what?
They had some of the same features.
You got it. Many of those supposedly unique bird-like features, turns out they were present in other non-avian theropods too, especially troodontids. Things like the pneumatic sinuses, the palate structure, even the lack of serrations sometimes. So those features weren't uniquely linking Archaeornithoides to birds anymore. They were more widespread in that part of the dinosaur family tree.
So the argument for it being the absolute closest relative kind of weakened.
It definitely did. The features weren't as diagnostic as initially thought.
Okay, so if it wasn't necessarily the sister taxon to birds, where does it fit? Did the original researchers have other ideas about its broader relationships?
They did, yeah. In that same 93 paper, they suggested a wider grouping. They put Archaeornithoides together with troodontids, but also, interestingly, with Spinosauridae, the big sail-backed fish eaters.
Spinosaurs? That seems like an odd grouping.
It does now, yeah. And they also included a reptile called Lisboasaurus. They proposed this whole group formed a clade with birds, which would have implied birds branched off earlier than many people thought.
But that broader idea didn't hold up either.
No. Later phylogenetic studies just didn't find evidence for that close link between spinosaurids and troodontids. It seems like convergent evolution or misinterpretation of some feature.
And Lisboasaurus.
That turned out to be something else entirely. Probably a lizard or maybe a crocodilomorph relative. Definitely not a close dinosaur relative in that context.
Okay, so that wider grouping fell apart. That leaves us with the connection to troodontids. Since it's a juvenile, was it maybe just a young Saurornithoides or Byronosaurus, other troodontids found nearby?
That was definitely considered. It's a very logical question. You find a juvenile, you wonder if it belongs to an adult species already known from the area.
Makes sense.
But subsequent work, particularly studies looking at how these dinosaurs grew, complicated that idea.
How so?
Well, studies on juvenile skulls of related dinosaurs, like Byronosaurus, showed that a lot of the distinctive adult features actually appear very early on, sometimes even in hatchlings.
Ah, so you'd expect to see some telltale signs of being a young Byronosaurus even in this small skull.
You might, yeah. And the Archaeornithoid specimen lacks really clear, unambiguous features that firmly tie it to the known adults of Saurornithoides or Byronosaurus. Makes it more probable, though not certain, that it's its own distinct thing.
So still likely a troodontid, or close to them, but maybe its own species.
That seems to be the most likely scenario based on current evidence. It's generally classified within or very close to Troodontidae.
And what about more recent analyses? I think you mentioned Bever and Norell looked at it in 2009.
Right. Their phylogenetic analysis, looking at its relationships, found only weak support for it being specifically a juvenile troodontid. And importantly, they found no strong evidence putting it particularly close to avialae, to birds.
So that further challenges the original big claim.
Exactly. It supports the idea that it's likely some kind of troodontid, but its precise spot on the family tree and its direct link to bird origins remains a bit, fuzzy. It just highlights how much we still have to learn, often from incomplete fossils.
It really shows how science is this ongoing process of refinement. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. There was something else interesting about this fossil. Evidence of a tough end. Bite marks.
Yes, that's another fascinating part of the story. Elzanowski and Welmhofer, back in their original descriptions, noted what looks like distinct bite marks on the skull fragments.
Bite marks. From what?
Well, the back of the head fragment was also quite ragged, damaged. They proposed that maybe the jaws had been bitten off the brain case.
Ouch.
And they suggested a potential culprit, a mammal called Deltatheridium.
A mammal.
Yeah, a small, sort of weasel-sized mammal that was actually pretty common in the same fossil beds at Bainzac.
Whoa, okay. A Mesozoic mammal possibly preying on a small dinosaur. That's pretty dramatic.
It is. It would be potentially very early evidence for that kind of interaction, but there was an alternative idea proposed later.
Oh, what was that?
In 2002, Clark and colleagues suggested another possibility. Maybe the damage wasn't from a direct bite during predation.
So what else could it be?
They proposed that the Archaeornithoid specimen might have actually passed through the digestive tract of a predator before it got fossilized.
Ah, so eaten, digested partly, and then, well, expelled or regurgitated.
Something like that, yeah. The stomach acids and digestive processes could potentially explain the damage observed on the bone fragments.
That's also pretty grim, but plausible. Both scenarios tell us something interesting, though.
They absolutely do. If it was Deltatheridium biting it, that points to mammals actively hunting small dinosaurs, which fits with later, more direct evidence like Repenomamus found with dinosaur remains inside it.
Right.
And even if it passed through a digestive tract, that still tells us about the food web, about who is eating whom, and the general perils of being a small creature in the late Cretaceous.
It paints a picture of a really complex ecosystem, not just big dinosaurs dominating everything.
Exactly. It highlights the vulnerability of these smaller dinosaurs and the intricate interactions happening, potentially involving mammals in ways we didn't always appreciate.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive on Archaeornithoids, what are the main things you think we should take away?
Well, first, I'd say its discovery was important because it gave us this tantalizing, if ultimately debated, look at a small dinosaur with features that seemed very bird-like, really fueling the discussion on bird origins.
Right, even if the direct link became less certain.
Exactly. Second, while it's probably not the closest relative to birds as first thought, it still represents this distinct, very small dinosaur, likely a troodontid or close relative, adding to the diversity we know.
And the third point.
And third, that evidence of damage, whether bite marks or digestion, gives us this really fascinating sort of visceral glimpse into the paleoecology, the dangers these animals face, possibly even from mammals.
It really is amazing how one little fragmentary skull can spark so much research and debate, and how the story evolves over time. You see that scientific process in action.
Absolutely. And it leaves you thinking, doesn't it? This little dinosaur, maybe bird-like, maybe prey for mammals. What does that really tell us about the pressures and dynamics back then?
Yeah.
And you have to wonder how many other small, seemingly insignificant fossils are out there just waiting to completely change our picture again. What other surprising stories are hidden in those fragments?